When I first arrived at the Lockwood estate, I thought I had stepped into a dream, or maybe a movie. The house wasn't just a mansion, it was a labyrinth. Marble staircases spiraled upward into floors I couldn't even count. Chandeliers swayed gently in air-conditioned breezes. The hallways were long enough to echo your own footsteps back at you, so you were never entirely sure if you were alone. The Lockwoods themselves were polite in the way wealthy people often are, distantly kind, like they were following a script. They had 3 children, but I was only responsible for the youngest, 10-year-old Lila. Sweet, pale-faced Lila, with hair the color of corn silk, and a way of staring at you, like she was memorizing your every move. My contract was simple. Keep her company, help with homework, and make sure she stayed on a healthy routine. The Lockwoods emphasized that phrase more than once, but there was one condition, one rule. The top floor of the mansion, the 5th floor, was forbidden. It's private, Mrs. Lockwood told me, her crimson nails tapping the marble countertop as if to punctuate her words. No need for you to ever go up there. She smiled, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. In fact, nothing about her ever did. At first, it was easy to obey. I was overwhelmed enough navigating the 4 floors I was allowed to wander. The place had everything. A pool indoors and outdoors, a theater room larger than the cinema in my hometown, even a library that still smelled faintly of old leather and dust, despite the glossy new bindings on most of the books. Lila was quiet, but she warmed to me quickly. We read together, played in the gardens, and sometimes stayed up later than we should, giggling about things her parents would never understand. But the longer I stayed, the more I noticed her eyes drifting upward, toward the ceiling, toward the forbidden floor. It was in my 2nd week when I first heard it. I was tucking Lila in for the night. The house had settled into its midnight hush, the kind of silence that presses in on your ears until you can hear your own heartbeat. And then, from above us, came a sound. Whispers. Not Lila's, not any of the children's. These were lower, rougher, as though dragged across stone. Words I couldn't catch. Just muttering. I froze. "Do you hear that?" I asked. But Lila only shook her head and turned onto her side. "Good night," she whispered too quickly, as though she wanted the conversation to end. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I swore I heard faint footsteps pacing the ceiling above me. Curiosity is a curse, and in that house, it was stronger than fear. A week later, I decided to see for myself. The Lockwoods were gone for the evening, some charity gala where their smiles were just as hollow as they were at home. The older children were with tutors. Lila had fallen asleep clutching a tattered doll I had never seen before, one with an eerily familiar stitched-on face. I told myself I was just going to look, just enough to prove there was nothing to fear. The staircase to the 5th floor was tucked behind a heavy oak door. Oddly, it wasn't locked. My hand trembled as I turned the knob. The air grew colder with each step. The silence pressed heavier. And when I reached the top, I realized why I had been forbidden. The room wasn't a bedroom or an office. It wasn't furnished at all. It was a gallery. Photographs covered every inch of the walls, floor to ceiling, not framed, pinned, torn from magazines and newspapers. Some were official portraits, others candid shots. All of them were of the Lockwood children. Their faces were circled in thick red ink. In some, the eyes were gouged out. In others, their mouths were scribbled over with frantic strokes. The pictures weren't arranged neatly. They overlapped, layered upon each other like a desperate, growing collection. And then, through the cold, a voice. It whispered my name. I spun around, heart hammering, but the floor was empty. Just me, and the walls watching me back. I bolted. My feet barely touched the stairs as I fled, slamming the oak door behind me. I didn't stop until I was back in my room, locking the door like it would keep whatever that was out. The next morning I tried to convince myself I had imagined it. Stress, exhaustion, the weight of the mansion pressing on my mind. But then I tucked Lila into bed again, and I saw it. The doll she clutched so tightly. Its stitched face wasn't just similar to hers. It was identical. Pale hair, blue eyes, the same little mole near her lip. Her fingers curled around it protectively. Her gaze slid to the ceiling above us. "They watch," she whispered softly. So softly I almost missed it. "Who?" I asked, my throat dry. Her eyes finally met mine. And for the first time since I'd arrived, she smiled. Not a child's smile, not a playful grin. It was the same hollow smile her mother wore when she said the top floor was private. And her eyes weren't looking at me. They were watching the ceiling, watching the locked floor. I never went up there again, but the whispers never stopped. Some nights, I still hear them. And sometimes, I think I see red ink smudges on the edge of Lila's doll. Like someone is still scribbling. Like someone never left that room. They say money buys protection. But not from this. Not from what hides in the halls of the rich, waiting for the lights to go out. If these stories shook you, hit like, drop a comment, and share before the whispers find you too. And if you're still here, subscribe. Because once you know what the nannies saw, you'll never look at luxury the same way again. When I accepted the nanny job for the Vanderbloom family, I thought I had hit the jackpot. They lived in one of those glass-walled penthouses that looked down on the entire city. Skyscrapers, traffic, bridges, all of it glittering like a toy set. I was promised my own suite, more money than I'd ever made before, and a staff who would take care of everything except the kids. My only responsibility: watch over the 8-year-old twins, Sophie and Samuel. The Vanderblooms were never home. They were always jetting off to galas in Dubai, business conferences in Singapore, or retreats in Switzerland. The children, oddly enough, didn't seem to mind. They were polite, well-behaved, but eerily quiet. Most 8-year-olds I'd worked with had tantrums, fought over toys, screamed when bedtime came. Sophie and Samuel simply listened, too perfectly. It was on my third night that things shifted. I had been half asleep when I heard it. Soft giggling. Children's laughter. At first, I smiled, assuming the twins were sneaking into the living room to play. But when I opened my eyes, I noticed both of them lying in their beds, their chests rising and falling in deep, even sleep. The giggles didn't stop. They floated through the penthouse, light and sharp, overlapping like echoes. I padded barefoot to the living room. The city lights cut through the glass walls, painting the furniture in silvery patterns. And that's when I froze. Shadows moved against the walls. Not mine, not the furniture's, not from any passing headlights below. These shadows were too tall, impossibly thin, stretching toward the ceiling like they were pulled on strings. They leaned in crooked angles, jittering slightly, as if struggling to maintain their shape. And the worst part? None of them touched the floor. They hovered. I stood there paralyzed as they circled the children's play area. The one with the plush rug and bins of toys. They moved in slow, deliberate steps, whispering in a language I couldn't understand. The sound was low, gravelly, vibrating against my ribs. When I finally found my voice, I whispered, "Hello?" The shadows froze. Then, as if melting into the walls, they vanished. The next morning, while pouring cereal for Sophie and Samuel, I joked, "Did you two sneak out to play last night?" They exchanged a look. That kind of secretive, knowing look only twins can pull off. Then Sophie asked, in the most matter-of-fact tone, "Did you see the guests?" My hand paused mid-air, spoon hovering over the bowl. "Guests?" Samuel nodded. "They come at night. They like to watch us play." I laughed, nervously, brushing it off as a game, but the back of my neck prickled. I told myself it was just imagination, exhaustion, maybe the city lights playing tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the sound of that whispering. That afternoon, when the twins were busy coloring, I pulled up the penthouse's security feed on the wall panel. Every room had cameras, state-of-the-art, night vision, motion detection. I rewound the footage to the hour I'd heard the giggling. Nothing. The living room was empty. No movement, no flickering shadows. Just silence. But I knew what I saw. When I returned to the twins, Samuel looked up from his drawing and said quietly, "The cameras can't see them." I hadn't mentioned checking the cameras. Each night after that, the shadows returned. Always around the same time. Always circling the play area like they were tethered to it. And every night, I felt their whispers grow louder, like static pressing against my eardrums. What unsettled me most wasn't the shadows anymore. It was the children. By the end of the first week, Sophie and Samuel would sit upright in their beds at night, eyes fixed on the corners of the room. I caught them whispering under their breath, mimicking the strange language. Their small voices slipped into harsh, guttural tones that didn't sound like them at all. One night, I tried shaking them out of it. "Hey, snap out of it. You're scaring me." They both turned to me at the exact same time, eyes wide, pupils blown so dark they swallowed the color. In perfect unison, they said, "They're not scaring you. They're teaching us." I backed out of the room, my chest tightening, every instinct telling me to leave. But where would I go? The Vanderblooms weren't due back for weeks. It all came to a head on the 10th night. The giggling was louder than ever, echoing through the walls. When I stumbled into the living room, the shadows weren't just circling the play area anymore. They were everywhere, clinging to the ceiling, crawling along the glass walls, distorting the city lights outside. The twins sat cross-legged on the rug, hands clasped, their voices weaving with the whispers. The air felt heavy, charged, as if the whole penthouse was holding its breath. Then, one of the shadows broke away from the circle. It stretched toward me, its long fingers unraveling like smoke. My body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. My throat closed, my feet rooted. Sophie turned to look at me. Not with malice, not even with fear. Just calm certainty. "They say you can stay," she whispered. "But you have to play with them too." The shadow's hand brushed against my arm. It was ice cold, colder than anything I'd ever felt. My vision swam. The last thing I remember was the children giggling, soft, innocent, before everything went dark. When I woke, it was morning. The sun was blazing through the glass walls. The penthouse was spotless. No shadows, no whispers, no signs of anything unnatural. The twins were eating breakfast like nothing had happened. I packed my bags and left that afternoon. No explanation, no notice. I didn't care about the paycheck, but sometimes, late at night, I still hear it. That strange, guttural whisper echoing just beyond the walls. And I wonder, did the guests follow me home? When the Billionaire family offered me a job as a traveling nanny, I didn't hesitate. Who would? A salary larger than I'd ever imagined, my own private cabin, meals prepared by chefs, and weeks spent drifting through the Mediterranean on their luxury yacht. At first, it felt like paradise. The sun was constant, the sea was endless blue, and the children were happy, carefree in ways I rarely saw kids these days. They had everything: jet skis, swimming pools, entire playrooms full of toys. All I had to do was watch them. Easy, but paradise never lasts. It was close to midnight when I first heard it. Footsteps above the deck. Heavy, deliberate, pacing back and forth. I assumed it was one of the crew, maybe checking ropes or equipment. But when I asked the next morning, they looked at me strangely. No one was topside last night, the captain said. I laughed it off. Ships creak, waves slap, sounds carry. But deep down, something didn't sit right. The footsteps had been too steady, too purposeful. On the fourth night, 9-year-old Clara came running into my cabin. She was trembling, her cheeks wet with tears. "The walls are moving," she whispered. I knelt down, trying to calm her. "Sweetheart, it's just the boat rocking. That's what happens on the water." She shook her head furiously. "No, the yacht is alive. It doesn't want us here." Her words sent a chill down my spine. Children say strange things, I told myself. Their imaginations are wild. But there was something in her eyes, pure animal fear, that unsettled me. That night, everything changed. I woke again to the footsteps, only this time they were inside the yacht. I crept into the hallway barefoot, clutching a flashlight. The corridor looked the same as always, but as I walked, it seemed longer, stretching. The walls angled inward ever so slightly, forcing me to duck. By the time I reached the end, I realized the hallway had twisted. What should have led to the dining room now opened into the laundry. Another door took me to a storage room I'd never seen before. The yacht had become a maze. I tried retracing my steps, but every turn led me deeper into impossible architecture. Ceilings sloping, doors shrinking, staircases looping back on themselves. And then the mirrors. The yacht had these full-length mirrors lining the corridors, meant to make the space feel bigger. Only that night, the reflections didn't match. In one, I saw a door behind me that didn't exist. In another, I saw a figure standing over my shoulder. Tall, faceless, its head nearly brushing the ceiling. But the worst was when my reflection moved on its own. Its lips curled into a smile I didn't make. And in a voice that wasn't mine, it mouthed, "You're next." The whispers began after that. Soft at first, like waves brushing against the hull. But soon, they grew louder. Dozens of voices overlapping in languages I couldn't recognize. They seeped from the walls, the floors, the ceilings, until the whole yacht seemed to hum with them. The children heard it too. They pressed their hands to their ears, sobbing. Clara whispered prayers she must have learned at school. Her younger brother, Max, just stared at the walls, wide-eyed, muttering, "Don't answer them. Don't answer them." I asked the crew if they heard anything. They looked pale, tight-lipped. One of them muttered something about old stories and walked away. By morning, I'd had enough. I told myself I would leave, find a port, book a flight home, disappear from this nightmare. But when I tried to reach the bridge, it was gone. I don't mean locked. I mean gone. The staircase that led to it now spiraled back down into the lower decks. No matter how many times I tried, I couldn't reach the captain's controls. The GPS looped endlessly, displaying coordinates that made no sense. We weren't moving, but the water outside churned as if in a storm. And yet, above deck, the sea was calm. Perfectly calm. That's when I realized we weren't lost at sea. We were trapped somewhere else. The climax came on the 12th night. The whispers erupted into laughter. High-pitched, mocking, cruel. The yacht shook violently, though no waves touched it. Lights flickered, hallways bent, doors slammed shut. The children screamed as their toys began sliding across the floor, pulled by some invisible current. I dragged them into the living room, only to find the glass walls covered in condensation from the inside. Words scrawled themselves into the fog, letter by letter. Stay with us. Clara clutched my hand so tightly, her nails drew blood. It doesn't want to let us go, she cried. And then I saw it. Through the glass, beneath the dark water, something massive shifted. Not a whale, not a submarine. Something bigger. Its outline pressed against the hull, stretching longer than the yacht itself, its shape blotting out what little moonlight filtered down. It wasn't the yacht that was alive. It was inside the yacht, using it, twisting it, claiming it. I don't remember how I made it back to my cabin that night. I must have blacked out. When I woke, the sun was rising, the yacht was still, and everything looked normal again. Too normal. Like nothing had happened. The crew avoided eye contact. The children refused to leave their rooms. I asked the captain when we would dock. He only said, "Soon." But his voice shook, and his hands clutched the wheel like he was holding on for dear life. It's been weeks since then. The days blur. The sea never ends. The GPS loops forever. Sometimes I wonder if we're even in the real world anymore. And every night, when I pass a mirror, I see my reflection smiling at me, waiting. When I accepted the position with the Ivanov family, I thought it would be like every other elite nanny job. Demanding, yes, but rewarding. They were wealthy beyond imagination, with an estate in Moscow that looked less like a home and more like a fortress. Guards at the gates, security cameras on every corner, marble halls that echoed when you breathed. But it wasn't the guards, or the silence that unsettled me. It was the nursery. It was enormous, larger than most apartments I'd lived in, with vaulted ceilings, a crystal chandelier, and walls painted the palest blue. Toys were arranged with military precision. Dolls lined up in neat rows, wooden blocks stacked symmetrically. Not a thing out of place. And it was freezing. Always freezing. No matter how many times I checked the thermostat, it never climbed above 12 degrees Celsius. I wore sweaters, coats, even gloves at times, but the children, 3 of them, all under the age of 10, never shivered. They didn't complain. They didn't fidget. They sat quietly, hands folded, eyes fixed forward, as if waiting for instructions. Their obedience should have made my job easier. Instead, it terrified me. It happened one night when I was tidying the nursery after the children had gone to bed. I heard it, soft whispers, muffled, coming from the wardrobe. At first, I thought it was the children playing a trick on me, hiding inside. I smiled, trying to mask the unease creeping up my spine. But as I approached, the whispers grew sharper, layered as if more than one voice was speaking at once. A chant, almost, though I couldn't understand the words. I reached for the wardrobe door. Before my fingers touched the handle, it slammed shut with a force that rattled the crib across the room. The children didn't stir. They lay in their beds, wide awake, staring at the ceiling. Not frightened, not curious, just blank. I backed out of the room, heart pounding, telling myself it was a draft, a trick of air pressure, but deep down, I knew better. The next morning during playtime, the eldest child, Anya, handed me a small leather-bound notebook. Her hands trembled as she gave it to me, though her face remained expressionless. I flipped it open. The pages were filled with drawings in black crayon, tall, faceless figures standing around the children's beds. Page after page, the same scene, the same figures, drawn in shaky, frantic strokes. And beneath every picture, the same words repeated over and over. "They come when you sleep." I looked up at Anya, my mouth dry. "Who are they?" She blinked once, then looked away. That was all. That night, the temperature in the nursery dropped even lower. I could see my breath fogging in the air. The radiator clicked uselessly, as if mocking me. I wrapped the children in extra blankets, as if tucking them in tightly. But they didn't thank me. They didn't even move. They simply lay there, their eyes fixed upward, unblinking. I followed their gaze. At first, I saw nothing. Just the ornate ceiling, painted with cherubs and clouds. But then, the shadows shifted. They slid across the walls like liquid, stretching and twisting unnaturally. Long fingers unfurled from the corners, brushing against the children's beds. The crib's mobile, delicate glass stars, suspended on golden threads, began to spin. Slowly at first, then faster, rattling violently as though some unseen wind was blowing through it. The whispers returned, louder this time, filling the room. And then, silence. The chandelier flickered once, twice, then dimmed. I dropped to the floor, huddling against the wall, whispering prayers I hadn't spoken since childhood. The children didn't move, didn't blink, didn't cry. They only stared at the ceiling, their faces pale and still, as if entranced. The next morning I confronted the parents. I told them the nursery was too cold, that the children were frightened, that something was wrong. They barely looked up from their breakfast. "The temperature is fine," the mother said. "The children are fine," the father added. His voice was clipped, final. That was it. No concern, no questions. As if they already knew, and it didn't matter. It was then I realized the truth. They didn't care. On my final night in that house, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I stayed in the nursery, bundled in a blanket, sitting on the floor near the children's beds. The air grew so cold, it burned my skin. Frost bloomed along the window panes. The whispers returned, so loud now, they vibrated through the mattress frames. And then, the wardrobe door creaked open. Darkness spilled out. Not just shadow. Thick, heavy, crawling darkness that moved like smoke but clung like tar. The faceless figures emerged one by one, impossibly tall, their heads brushing the ceiling. They circled the beds, just as the drawings had shown. Their presence pressed down on me, crushing, suffocating. The children lay perfectly still, their eyes following the figures with eerie calm. I wanted to scream, to grab them, run, escape. But my body refused to move. One of the figures turned toward me, its faceless head tilted, studying me. And then, in a voice that was every whisper combined, it said, "You don't belong here." I don't remember what happened next. When morning came, I was on the nursery floor, my blanket soaked with condensation. The wardrobe stood open, empty. The children sat on their beds, silent, watching me. I packed my things and left that same day. The parents didn't stop me. They didn't even ask why. But as I closed the front door behind me, I glanced back at the frost-covered windows of the nursery. And in the glass, I saw them. Those faceless figures, tall and patient, watching. I still don't know if they were protecting the children or waiting for them. But I do know this. If I had stayed one more night, I wouldn't have left at all.